Good afternoon. Welcome to APA's weekly webinar series. My name is Billy Zydig, Standards and Codes Administrator for APA. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. The webinar recording will be posted to the APA webpage later this afternoon. You will receive a follow-up email tomorrow with a link to the webpage where all webinar recordings are housed, as well as a link to our upcoming webinars. We have webinars planned out through April of 2020 and are open for registration. All attendees are in listen-only mode. Please type your questions in the chat box and they will be answered in the order they are received during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. If we run out of time and we still have questions, responses will be sent directly to the person asking the question by one of the presenters. AIA and professional continuing education credits are being offered. Please send me an email at Billie, B-I-L-L-I-E, @apa.org to request a certificate if you did not register or if you didn't ask for one when you registered. Also, if you have more than one person attending the session from a central location, please contact me so everyone gets credit for attending. At this time, it is my pleasure to turn this over to Rob Murchison and Matt Close. Take it away, gentlemen.
Thank you, Billy. Good morning, good afternoon to those of you on the East and West Coast. My name is Rob Murchison. I am joined by Matt Close I'm out of Charlotte, North Carolina. Matt is in the West Coast in the Seattle area. We are thrilled to be able to be your instructors for the next 45 minutes or so, and we'll leave some time for questions and answers. I'll be doing the majority of the content. Matt, in his vast experience, is going to jump in with some questions, and we also want to encourage all of y'all on the line to message questions to Billy as well, because that we want this to be as interactive and as learning as possible. As a reminder, this is an AIA. This is for AIA credits, as Billy just stated. Tell you just a little bit about intelligent buildings and the perspective that we come from, and then I'm going to let Matt just jump in on a little color as well. Is we are a singularly focused, vendor agnostic, smart building and campus consulting and services organization, and the learning that we're going to share with you over the next 45 minutes, next hour or so, comes from us the last 15 years working with corporate, commercial real estate, healthcare, higher ed, government, and military. We've had the good fortune to do this, just not in North America, but in Singapore, Europe, and Asia. We're gotten a lot of this learning just by touching both new construction and our existing customers that now total over about 3 billion square feet. But I want to emphasize that we are evangelists for the smart buildings and campuses world, and we are always excited to share our customer our learnings from our customers, because that's where a lot of this comes from. Matt, do you have anything you would like to add?
Yeah, just kind of as first off, it's awesome being here, and thanks for including me. But what I would also want you guys to hear, because as we go through this, we're going to be talking about a lot of big concepts and big ideas, and smart campus sounds like a really big idea. Just know, in the context of listening to this, there's ways you can get started in very determined early steps. So as one of the things going forward, Rob, I'll make sure that we kind of talk to is, how do I get started on my journey, as opposed to, am I at my destination?
Great point. So just as a highlight, I'm not going to read this slide, but for those of you on this listening in, this is meant to be an introduction to smart buildings and campuses. And right to Matt's point, at a high level, we're going to talk through a step-by-step guide on how to get started. We're going to talk through the attributes of smart buildings, what's the catalyst for change, the goals of of a smart building strategy, and we're big advocates after 15 years of this of having a plan versus just doing. And then the opportunities within the model, and you'll hear the theme of data is extremely important here. And then and one of the things that you'll hear emphasized throughout this is establishing cybersecurity guidelines as relates to managing the risk associated with the multiple vendors that work within your buildings. And you'll hear us say this several times throughout the course of this conversation. There's huge opportunity to use data to drive better decisions, but it has been our experience working with 3 billion plus square feet of customers that if we don't address the cybersecurity risk early on, and really that means bringing IT into the conversation, because we know the vast majority of the audience here is from the facility side of the house, that can slow down a rapid adoption across a campus and large portfolio. So our learning objectives here, we're going to talk about why smart buildings and campuses. We are then going to highlight the drivers of the change, and those are really focused around buildings, the technology that's hitting us really hard, and the big one is the people. We're going to talk about some of the principles of a smart campus, and then to make that real, I'm going to share a couple of the case studies, and then to Matt's point, we'll go through just a high level of what a next step action plan can look like. So why smart campuses? I think it's important. We sort of set the context here. And the context is that digital buildings arrived in the 80s, and it caught an entire ecosystem off guard, whether that be architects and engineers or contractors and staff or property services, human resources. The list goes on. They were slow to react for a variety of reasons. I mean, first of all, technology is hitting us, and it's hard to stay current with it. But the other thing is the life cycle of facilities is in the decades, and the life cycle of IT systems is in the months and in a couple of years. So there's this contrast that has been happening, and there's great promise around leveraging. I mentioned this earlier, leveraging data to drive better decision making and actions across a campus. But because of this change cycle of technology moving much faster than the change cycle of facilities, it's created quite a contrast. And data. Yeah, go ahead, Matt.
Just really quick on that. As this has been a 35-year history, has it been a slow build, kind of steady as you go, or have there been some real inflection points along the way?
Oh, there definitely have been some inflection points along the way. I think if you as you look back in time, just for the context, buildings became digital, and the first thing we were really doing was to get that remote access. And then there was and a lot of the facility folks on the line were probably familiar with a solution called Tritium that hit the market in the late 1990s. But it was the first building system that used IT in a open way using this thing called Java, and that enabled the data not only to be not only have remote access, but us to be able to use that data to do things in a new way. And that led to this third bullet we have up here of, just like water, gas, and electricity, data or information, which is a derivative of that, became more like a utility in buildings. So it's a great question, in that it has been a sort of a slow burn, but there have been certain hurdles. One was the protocols that used IP principles in the starting in the early 90s. In the late 90s, there was the introduction of software that enabled that to happen. And then if you fast forward now, I would say the biggest catalyst in both in a good and a I would say almost scary way at times is all this IT, this realization that all these systems are IT, has created a risk, which we'll talk about around cybersecurity. So good, really good question, Matt. As far as the themes for since the beginning of this century, when we talk about smart buildings, it was back in the early 2000s that, oh, a building is going to be smart and I'm going to put internet and Wi-Fi in it. Didn't really make it smart. It just had internet, and we talked about Wi-Fi in there. As that evolved, we then had energy and sustainability. We could use that to reduce greenhouse gases, for example. And then the message, as we hit the recession, started to say, wait a second, that sustainability is good, but how do we drive down our cost, especially during that time as energy costs started to rise? Then they said, wait, we need to have strategy around that, and or at very least, let's start to make a plan. And then technology became more and more powerful, and it wasn't just using the data in some spreadsheets. It was using the data and big data analytics to analyze billions and billions of data points. That evolved into this point that you're talking about, Matt, as far as a milestone around the cybersecurity. And now the concentration a lot, and I can say this because I have millennials as children, the expectations of the younger generations is the experience inside of my building should be as close as it can to the experience that I have on my mobile phone. And that's where we are today with this. We feel a strong market demand and a need to simplify. So we like to show this visual to get the point across. And the point here is that this is a collaborative effort, and it requires facility folks and IT folks working together to make this happen. And this is a visual. Gosh, I think this might be 10 years old that we put together a sort of a cartoon to try to show what is really happening here in the industry.
And I think one of the things that we hear all the time when companies and campuses start to, I put in air quotes, get it, is that it's a team sport. We cannot accomplish it in a silo. It's got to be across organizations.
Absolutely. And to that point, in our 15 plus years of experience here, those of you on the line, if a lot of times we're lecturing to an audience, we'll get them to raise their hand. Have you heard of Simon Sinek? And it's one of the most downloaded YouTube videos of all time. And it talks about the golden circle and the idea of starting with why, and where we've seen that, and this is a big message, and we'll emphasize this at the end of the presentation as well, is the way to get IT and facilities to work together is to start with why you're doing it, not start talking about how and what, because that conversation can get into a lot of conversations where IT is saying things that facilities don't understand, and facilities are saying things that IT doesn't understand. But as we start with the why and focus on the business drivers, that allows everyone to get on the same page, because let's not shy away from it. This is change. This is not status quo. This is change, but this is change for the better. And if there's reasons to change, then everyone is willing to sort of stick their neck out a little bit, because there's a better way of doing things.
Yeah, I think what that really ties to Rob is the fact that it's a conversation about collaboration, yet they're coming from very different technological needs, and so it has to start at a common level. And for example, Rob, I know you've had a lot of conversations with Lander Midland on the why around a lot of these conversations, and I think both facilities and IT on a campus can agree on some of those higher level things, which in turn would trickle down to the common understanding across the collaborative effort.
Yeah, yes, and to that point, Matt, this is what we call the SMART paradox. And I mentioned the status quo, and this has changed. Like when we're doing education and evangelizing around this, we like to just get the out in the open here, and maybe we can call it the elephant in the room. And what that is that if you stay in a world where everyone has close agreement and everyone has close certainty, it's comfortable, but you're staying in a world where we all know what and we all know how. What the fear is psychologically is that we're going to go far from agreement and far from certainty on our outcomes, and we're going to reach into we're going to get into a world of anarchy. And Matt and I and our organization, back to 3+ billion square feet that we've worked with, can say that if you put a plan together and you start with why, that won't happen. And it doesn't happen in most any case, but there's a psychological fear that we're going to go from the simple to a more complicated world. We're going to get into this whole world of complexity, and then things are going to go out of control. And the reality of it is that the benefit of the change is so high that it's worth going down the conversation and starting with why, and looking into and getting alignment around some of the business values. And in that context, this is a great cheat sheet. So when you start with why, these are the 6 things, and they all virtually always fall into these 6 categories. So inside of your institutions, when you're starting to get a smart campus initiative going, these are the categorical questions that should be asked. How can we use smartness, particularly data, to reduce our operational expense? Can we use this idea of convergence around IT to reduce our capital expense? Can we use IT best practices around security to address the risk associated with these building systems becoming digital, even if we don't want to go down a completely smart journey today? Can we use, we talked about the evolution of the smart conversation, and going back to the why, data can be used to to improve sustainability. It can also be used to get better occupancy of the space. We all know that maintaining a square foot and building a square foot is expensive, and if we can utilize smart approaches to have better utilization of that space, that allows us to be get far more value out of our dollars. And then the last piece, and this is really important with the younger generation that's coming onto your campuses, is how do you make that experience through technology as close as possible to the experience or the expectations that they have as an application on their phones.
Yeah, and Rob, I think on that last one, I think we could, I'll say, substitute or replace or just insert for occupant and tenant satisfaction, to have that to be, faculty, student, and staff satisfaction, because they're the ones that you're trying to, attract world-class faculty, attract world-class staff, and have awesome students in growing your institution. And if you're able to leverage these strategies to do that, that's one of those higher level things you can agree upon.
Yep, absolutely. So the point here is the opportunity is far bigger than the energy and operational cost. There is space so if you can save or if the bucket of addressable savings is around $3 or $4 from energy and operations, the bucket of savings for addressing the square footage could be $30+ a square foot, and the bucket of savings for the salaries and the values of tuitions is $300+ a square foot. And this rule in the industry is called the 330-300 rule. So it's just to the point here is that when you look back at the business drivers, look at it holistically as you come up with your whys, because it's far greater than just looking at the energy and operational costs. Now, when we talk about where we're headed, the desired end state, this is something that, and I'll spend a little bit more time on this in a few minutes. This is the idea of data, and the idea is that data comes out of buildings. It is you observe it using technology. Folks get trained on how to use that technology at an individual basis. The institution learns to trust that individual's selection of choices based on that, and they make a decision, and then they bring that into action. So when we talk about smart campuses, this is what we are trying to achieve here, and it's important to understand that there are forces that are driving new norms, both forces internally and external forces, whether they be around brand and economics, environmental, the social demographics. We have a push and a pull that is taking us into new norms. And to Matt, to your point, that last thing around experience, this is the force that is pulling us in that direction. Were you gonna say something?
Nope.
Okay, so when we talk about the key stakeholders, it's important to look at this in two areas, and people are, you'll hear us emphasize this over and over again, people are the biggest challenge, because this is change. The technology exists, the building system capabilities exist, but if you can look at the key stakeholders, understand there's direct beneficiaries around the designers, the builders, and the operators of your facilities, and there's indirect beneficiaries from both the public and the students and the faculty. And you can categorize that as you focus on your why, and the whys are unique by individual institutions, but they have a lot of common themes. As you focus on there, it's good to look at it in these groups, because the group at the top, in a lot of ways, you're going to be able to tie the use of technology in the facilities to a quicker outcome than you are at the bottom. The bottom is really focused on that experience, if you will, and safety.
Hey, Rob, is it safe to say that the direct beneficiaries are beneficiaries of the process, and the indirect are benefits of the outcomes?
Yep, that's well said. Well said.
Mm-hmm.
So what we here at our organization, Intelligent Buildings, just to emphasize the why piece, one of the outcomes of this learning today is to figure out where you are along the journey. And I'll emphasize again, a lot of times we see institutions start in somewhere in the middle where that lighter orange is, and start looking at data and the systems without defining the why first. And what that ends up doing is that ends up not getting to a decision and not scaling. And I'll just give you an example of that. On this slide here, I show this idea of use cases, the fourth box over the brown box on the right. Use cases are a way of building the Lego blocks so that everyone can align around an answer. And an example of a use case would be getting an employee to his or her desk from the street faster. And you can see that could use the lighting control to give us visibility into occupancy in particular space. We can use access code to see what gates they're going through. We can look at the parking as to when they arrive. We can look at the elevators. We can look at other different systems, and it's the interaction of these systems that sometimes folks will struggle with as they develop their use cases. So use cases are a really critical building block of how you can start this journey. And as you try to build your custom wines, what you will find is that the goals over here will help you determine the types of use cases you have, and it is those capabilities that will lead you down the road of how you do things and what you get out of that.
Hey Rob, if you can go to the use case slide, the last one you were on.
This one?
Yeah, and it just to kind of help bring it home, because a lot of us on the call, I'm sure, have had interactions with some really smart people from individual OEM companies, and they're able to. And if you tell them you're trying to solve how to get employees to the desk faster or students to the classroom faster, and you're talking with a parking solution, they're going to be able to address one element of that. And typically that company, because it's how they make their profit, is extremely focused on selling that solution as the solution to getting people to their desk factor. But if you take a step back at a little bit higher level and think about all of the things that implement that, it becomes less of an individual technology conversation to a strategy of how to enable that entire building or that entire campus around multiple different types of solutions to get to that one use case.
Yeah, and that's a point. So I skipped over it, and that is that we highly encourage your organization to lead the development of your use cases independent of an individual manufacturer or technology, instead of having a manufacturer who is trying to help you has your best interest, but they also don't understand necessarily the goals of your organization. So if you can define that why and work from the left here to the right, that allows the conversation to stay business driven. Because what will happen without fail, we have seen, is that if you don't at least check the boxes, and you may be in different spots on your journey depending on where your institution is, there'll become a conversation of, why am I spending $100,000 on putting these particular sensors in? Or why do I need to have these open protocols? Or why are these systems getting tied together? And if you don't have the use cases defined here, then sometimes that can be value engineered out, and it slows down the journey, even though it has a big benefit to the organization. So to that end, let's talk about the 3 complications that are associated with going down a smart campus journey. I think it's important to, before we dive too deep in that, to understand the technology changes that are happening and influencing the marketplace. Information is more available to people today than it ever has been. And at the same time, how we access that data is constantly changing. I mean, we got to look at the cloud. Everyone hears that word now. Everything's up in the cloud. And that is a definite trend from an IT perspective. We also have these Internet of Things that are happening, and they're producing just really big, large amounts of data. And that data now can be analyzed, and can be analyzed very quickly and at a very low cost. Smartphones, whether it's an Android, Apple, or whatever it may be, are becoming extremely powerful. And there's a new breed of apps that are happening on these devices. So the cloud, the IoT, the big data analytics, the mobility, the new breed of apps, they're all coming together to drive change. Yet buildings, because of their life cycle on building systems being 15 to 20 years on average, are in a lot of ways far behind on having enough capabilities to act like to do the same things as a smartphone. So you have the buildings that are relatively slow in comparison to what's happening with technology, and particularly when we talk about smart, the systems are not converged together. So what we're trying as we go down this journey, we're moving from the stuff in the gray on the left where everything is siloed to the orange on the right, where the systems not only are producing more data, they are converging onto a single but separate a network. We would call it in a lot of cases a base building network or a building systems network. They're converging onto a single network that is much easier to secure, but it provides one tap for the data and allows them to communicate with each other. So that's the very first complication, is the buildings are needing to converge and the systems are needing to have more capabilities. And just as a point of learning, one of the things that we'll commonly see is once these use cases are developed and we have defined the why within the institution, you now have a guidepost as to how smart are the buildings on my campus, and you can follow a pretty simple process to go assess the data availability and the convergence of each of the buildings that sit on this campus. So that's the complication number one. Complication number two, which we talked about a lot, is that the amount of IoT devices is devices is growing at crazy proportions here. By next year, there will be over 50 billion devices, objects, if you will, in the globe. I mean, when you look at the populations, could be close to 8 billion. We're talking about a pretty significant ratio of devices to folks, and the technology is just coming faster and faster and faster. So you have from a building perspective, these life cycles of 15, 20 years. It's costly in some cases and it doesn't make practical sense just to replace all the building technology in a building. Yet the IT technology is just refreshing every 3 to 5 years. So you have this contrast that develops. And so you get this second complication. And by the way, all these devices going to buildings, and over 5 billion of those will be sitting in building of the 50. 5 billion of the 50 will be sitting in buildings, creates a whole new confusion, if you will, around how do I address the security of all those devices. So then you move to the third complication. And the third complication, as we spoke to earlier, is people. And the people, it's all of us. I mean, buildings wouldn't exist, campuses wouldn't exist without people. Yet people are naturally resistant to change. But you need alignment, back to the why. You need alignment around the different stakeholder groups in order to facilitate the change. And this can feel a little daunting at the beginning, but if you think about it and back to the SMART paradox that I showed earlier, if you can realize that change is needed and focus on the benefits of the why, you can take incremental steps to get there. We like to say, don't try to bite off too much of the elephant in one bite. But sometimes human nature is to go do that. And what you need to do is take incremental steps. So I mentioned that in our experience, that cybersecurity, particularly how you manage your vendors around cybersecurity, becomes one of the biggest obstacles to taking little experiments or pilots on a campus and rolling that out at a very large scale. I think it's important to acknowledge that you need to address cybersecurity, and it's humans, it's people, it's human behavior that causes over 80% of the issues that you see within a building. So when IT becomes involved in the conversation, and we encourage IT to be involved in the conversation from the very beginning, that's not always the case. When IT becomes involved in the conversation, it's important to acknowledge that we're going to work together from a facilities and IT perspective to address that, because 80% of it happens with people. So then when you start talking the stakeholder alignment issue, it is also important to say in the bite of the elephant, from the bite of the elephant perspective, that you should start by addressing probably the most crucial alignment issue, and that is that IT and OT are different. And when we talk about, and obviously I can't see everyone on the phone here because we're doing this virtually, but when we do talks across the globe, without fail, when we say that, and we just use random names here, when we say that Larry and Tim are going to work together in this visual, Larry usually has this feeling, and it's perception, not reality, that IT is a pretty arrogant guy. This Tim guy is pretty arrogant. And the flip side, Tim feels that Larry is not with the times. He feels that Larry's not keeping up with the current technology. They're both perceptionally right, but they're fundamentally wrong. And that means, as you're trying to get this alignment here to address the cybersecurity concern, it's important to get them on the same page around the why, so that they can be buddies. And I'm not. We were on a campus recently, and it was really refreshing. And I think this is a great example. That had the IT and facilities sitting on the same page. And I'm sure many of you on the phone are doing that or considering doing that. But in order to address the people concerned and get that stakeholder alignment, we really encourage IT and we call it operational technology facilities to be on the same page and address the cultural and technology issues, because vendor risk management, as it relates to cybersecurity, is the number one thing that holds back this adoption of the smart buildings, of smart buildings. And that's IT things like the number of authorized users, or out-of-date software, or not having backups of the particular systems. As IT becomes more and more involved, when they see these things, they hold up the red flag. And what we encourage is working together is to go and address these, so we can see who has access, see who's allowed, and what actions are taking place.
And Rob, if we think about kind of I'll say the underlying motivations or the underlying business things that OT and IT are thinking about, I'm sure all of you have heard of the CIA model: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. The IT folks are coming at it very quickly from first and foremost is the confidentiality. They don't want data to get out. The integrity of that data, and then lastly is the availability of that data, because they would much rather make sure it's secured and with high integrity, but before they worry about is it readily accessible. OT side's exactly the opposite. It's the availability is number one, because they have all these sensors and things Rob has been talking about here, that their communication and dependencies can happen in milliseconds, and if those networks aren't available, they fall apart. If Larry can't dial into the system from his house at night to address something that's happened in the building, because there's a 24/7 cycle, availability holds him from doing that if there's some specialized login. So understanding the motivations of both sides to be able to find common ground in the middle is so key, and it starts with how they come to the table of what's most important.
Very, very important point. And just to give some examples of if this isn't addressed, there are from generators being able to be blown up. That's happened. Elevators in buildings being we commonly will do some cybersecurity assessments on buildings to find that the elevator control system is exposed to the internet. To jumping from the IT systems, from the facility IT systems into the enterprise IT systems. Obviously, that's not good if you have brand damage. And the last piece there is there's a big insurance gap because cybersecurity has carved out a lot of insurance policies today. So the point here is we look at the buildings, the IT, and the people. The biggest area to focus on if you're going to get this at scale is to focus on the people aspect of things, particularly around cybersecurity. So jumping on to the next learning area, principles of a smart campus. We've talked about this optimal smart building cycle. If you step back and look at it before technology would start to infiltrate the world in the 90s here, you just had buildings and you had people. And that left us with limited functional capabilities, no great ways to address performance. So the best day a building would operate may be the first 6 months or year after it opened up. Had a heavy reliance on people, lots of manual interactions, and technology, a limited amount, and a lot more today, the 50 billion plus devices, was just happening, and that created risk. Where we're headed to, and this is, there's going to be 9 words that I'm going to emphasize here in the next 5 minutes, and then we'll wrap up. Where we're headed to is a world where, as we showed earlier, data can be observed by technology. And just to give you a sense, one of our larger customers that we can talk about is the U.S. federal government. They look at, I believe it's 27 million data points a day coming out of a subset of their buildings, around 60 million square feet. And they're using that data, they're using technology to analyze that data, observe that data, so that individuals, the building engineers in the buildings, can then orient around that. And they trust that data to make those orientations. Then the organization needs to trust the individual, called the building engineer, who now has the choices of saying, here's the top 10 things wrong in my building. What can I address? Or here's the 5 things that I can do to enhance an experience. Or here's where I potentially see a data link and I can address a data leak and I can address the operational risk. They can trust that individual to then, the organization can make a decision, and that decision then can go into action. So we have these pillars of buildings that you heard from us, the pillars of people, and the pillars of technology, and all 3 of them need to come together so that you can have what we call the OODA cycle take place. And hopefully you can remember that. It stands for observe, orient, decide, and act. So that's the first thing that we want to take we want to enable the smart building cycle. And another point there is that you don't have to bite off the elephant all at once. You can just flow a little bit of data around that to get the people piece comfortable that it's not leaking, if you will, and that it is providing great actions which are achieving results. So the first thing is the building, the technology, and the people, first set of words. The second set of words I encourage you to remember is that as it relates to the data, the first thing you want to do is get visibility. The second thing you want to do is get control. So, and the controlling things in that smart building cycle, you always do that with a subset of things. And the most obvious example is you probably are not going to go to control the fire alarm data, but you do want visibility of that fire alarm data, because that you may use that to interact, as we talk about use cases, to interact with something else. And it's the combination of visibility and control, which is a subset of visibility, that you use to go create policy. So First 6 words: buildings, people, technology, as you start your journey. Second 6 words: visibility, control, and policy. Now, as it relates specifically to technology, it is important to understand these 3 words, and that is, from a data perspective, it has to be open, which we mean by open, that's the opposite of proprietary. So if your campus, your buildings within your campus are going to be smart, the data needs to be open and accessible. The second piece, and we talked about this in the building challenge, is it needs to be converged, and needs to be converged securely. And that provides 2 benefits. One, you can have a bunch of open systems, but if they're all sitting on separate networks, you got to tap into 10, 15, 20, 30 different taps, if you will. If they're converged, you have to tap into one thing. So that the ease of what we would call data harvesting becomes a lot easier, even though the system, even if you checked off the first box. If they're not converged, data harvesting becomes a lot more challenging. The second benefit is, by converging it, in cybersecurity terms, you now have 1 perimeter to protect versus 10, 15, 20 perimeters to protect. So the second piece is convergence. And the last, which is of these 9 words, we talked about buildings, technology, people, we talked about visibility, control, policy, open, converge. The 9th word is normalization. And normalization is the idea that every building is a snowflake. And by that we mean there's always a different combination of technology, age, where the marketplace was, vendors that work on the building, back to addressing the vendor risk management piece. There's always a unique combination, and you need to normalize that data in order to be able to use it to a maximum value. So 9 words, I'd say. Yeah, go ahead.
Open and normalized seem synonymous. How are those different again?
Great question. And of the nine words we just talked about, it's the hardest to sort of get your head around. Normalized is, I'll give you an analogy, is that Matt, you and I might both, obviously we both speak English, but when we refer to a thermostat in a building, we both know what that is, but a computer may call that a T-stat, or it may call that a stat, or it may call it Timbo2. It can call it anything. Normalization is the idea of, even though we're all speaking the same language, which is open, we're using the same vernacular as well. And there are a lot of different vernaculars. So even if you take a large controls manufacturer, Honeywell, Johnson Controls, Siemens, they were all open, but the integrator who put that system in can use their own point naming convention. And normalization is using a concept called tagging, which we're not gonna get into today, to help normalize that data so that a computer, big data analytics, can talk to that data. So the picture here is that the goals around energy efficient effectiveness that is achievable if we have visibility, control, and policy in place, and have a technology foundation of open and converged and normalized. This provides new opportunities, both from a security risk perspective, and just so I want to emphasize again, even if you don't go down a smart building journey or a smart campus journey, there are security risks that exist in your buildings today, guaranteed. But if you address this with new opportunities, you now have new technologies, new operating models. We talked about OT and IT, facilities and IT working together. They're great opportunities to work together. Let me just finish with a couple of case studies, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. If those of you that may be interested in the 2 case studies I'm going to talk to, we have full ones available that we freely share that sort of tell this story. One is a project that a very recent project in Hudson Yards, which is the largest private development in the United States, if not the world. Warner Media was consolidating 7 locations down to 1, reducing their square footage back to the square footage theme of 2.5 to 1.5 million. They needed new technology. We were able to work with them. The team, we're part of a team that was able to work with them that converged the systems. made the system cyber secure in one place to tap the data. And now they're using big data analytics to achieve those goals that we talked about. Those goals of they built it for cheaper. They were able to now run the building cheaper, but now they're also able to provide a new experience, meet sustainability goals, and obviously getting more people and less square footage. So here's one example of what can happen when you do something smart. And this building just opened a couple months ago. Another example, which I mentioned, was the GSA, their whole portfolio, the 60 million square feet or so. This is their headquarters building, a very similar similar example to Warner Media, just has happened a few years in the past, but it's the same concept. And it was versus the Warner Media was brand new construction. This was a major renovation, to show the example of you can also do this during renovation. And an important point there is that at renovation is the time when you can justify the cost of a new network, this convergence, so you can get the security and have that one place to tap into the data. Finishing with the smart building cycle, hopefully you can leave this image in your head. Billy, I should mention at the beginning that this is going to be available. There'll be a PDF of this available for you to view online. But this is the state that we encourage organizations to get to, and you have to do that by building this bridge between IT and OT. Last piece, hopefully we've drilled this in. Building that bridge is really important. If you want some more insights on that, you can go on our website, and we have a white paper that you can download. At this point, I will open it up for questions, and we can go from there.
Okay, we have quite a few questions. Are there additional online resources that you would recommend, such as LinkedIn groups or something like that?
Yeah, we can follow up. There are several LinkedIn groups around smart buildings. I would encourage that. We try to make our website a place where we can gather that information. I'd also encourage those of you, obviously mostly APA members, there will be we're going to have a deep breakout at the APA conference in Boston this year, and we're also working with Lander to probably have a separate, just focused smart campus event where we get the IT and facilities at the same event to focus on these wide questions.
And just a real tactical, easy one, because we're constantly looking for the latest and greatest in these subject matters. I suggest those of you that want to on the webinar to just follow myself and Rob, and then a gentleman by the name of Fred Gordy, Gordy, on LinkedIn, because we're always sharing resources and insights that we see from the industry through LinkedIn as well.
Good point, Matt.
Okay, our next question. In your experience, do people really know why they need to make the building smart and what smart really means?
In our experience, I imagine Matt is smirking right now.
I was going to say, do you have an hour? Yeah.
Typically, no. Typically, the organization doesn't know why. There are individuals in the organization that have a specific reason they're doing something, or they've come up with an idea, or a vendor has suggested, but organizationally, they don't know why. And it's so simple. There's this adage of the 5 whys. If someone says they want to go make a building smart or a campus smart, ask why, and then ask why. So it might be, so why you want to make the campus smart? Well, we can use data to drive better decisions. What type of decisions you drive? Well, I want to reduce operating costs. Oh, you want to reduce operating costs. So why do you want to reduce operating costs? Well, our chancellor said that we have to reduce it by 10%. And why did your chancellor say that? Well, the chancellor said that because the student, he sees student enrollment coming down in the 5 years, which is happening because of less babies in the world. And we got to figure out how we drive our operational costs down, and we have to use that to go fund a better experience. So the goals are extremely important, and starting with the why is pivotal.
Yeah, and when it comes to the definition of on how a smart build, the term smart building is used colloquially, I think probably what a lot of people mean when they say smart buildings or a smart home, it's they have technology in the building or technology in the home, or it's connected. But going back to what Rob was talking about earlier, when you start getting truly into smart building, you have an overarching strategy that allows you to use all that data that's coming from your building to make better decisions to impact those 6 drivers. So it's not just that there's technology in it and that it's connected, but is there a holistic way to be able to make those better decisions to affect operational cost and student experience? That's when you start getting to whether it's truly a smart building.
Great question.
Thank you. You mentioned that a building has a 20-year life, but most college and university buildings are built more to like the 50 to 100-year life. How does this impact any differences to be noted about implementation of technology, and are there recommended ways to renovate for the technology?
Oh, that is a great question, because it just exacerbates the problem, right? Where it's common, I'm sure many of the facility folks on the phone, you have a building that's 100 years old on your campus or older. So that comes back to this gap between what the building is capable of today and what it is, and what we need to do in the future. What we will tend to see is, even if you have, just take a simple example, a pneumatic system in the building, and I'm sure that those exist. We know, we see them all the time. There are ways of putting some basic sensoring in the building, so we can at least gather some data, and it may be a separate system. It may be this IoT thing where we can know the temperature and the humidity in the space, or the occupancy, but we can use just visibility. We talked about those 3 words of visibility, control, and policy. We can use visibility to start driving some better decisions, and hopefully that provides a better experience, or reduces costs, or hit some of those business drivers, so that you can use those insights to fund other things.
Okay, could you tell us what the average cost saving is when you go from a conventional building to a smart building?
Well, there's two aspects of that. If you're building a conventional building and you're building a smart building, and remember, there's no one particular definition of smart, but foundationally, a smart building, it has to have this 4th utility in it of water, gas, electricity. You got to have information as that 4th utility. Building an information utility in a building, if you address the holistic view of it, it is cheaper, and we can share use cases. It is cheaper to build that converged building than it is to build a non-converged building. So from a new construction perspective, it is a no-brainer. That's not always the perception, but it's a no-brainer. When we talk about the cost on a per square foot basis of the savings, you have to start looking at the different categories of ROI, and they fall into 2 categories generally. One is around operational cost savings, and the other is around an experiential gain. On the operational cost savings, if you break that down, the thing that is the most measurable, specifically measurable, let's face it, is the energy meters and the gas meters and the water meters that are on the facility. We easily can see savings in a 20% range, but I think conservatively you're going to get savings in a 10% range there, without a big lift if you're coming from a world where you weren't using data at all. If you are using some data, the savings can be a little less on the operational side, but they're still there. So First piece is it costs less to build a new construction. If you move to existing construction, we have the operational piece. The other piece is the experience, and that's it, because we talked about the indirect beneficiaries earlier. That's a lot harder to measure. There's an ROI there. There's some folks in Silicon Valley, they're starting to measure that, but that is a lot harder to measure. But you can tie it from a goal perspective back to differentiating the brand and attracting and retaining more students.
Yeah, and if you remember the slide that Rob showed was 3,300. That kind of comes from the commercial space. So the cost savings was more like the $3 a square foot, and but then as you get to the 30 and the 300, the coin kind of flips, and it goes to, can I keep my tenant better? Or in the college world, can I attract more students? So absolutely, there are cost savings from a capital expense, from an infrastructure perspective. Rob was talking about on the converged networks. There's cost savings from an operational expense perspective by reduced energy costs and all those associated elements. But then when you start seeing those indirect benefits of student acquisition, I recently went through the university cycle with my two children, and as we were visiting campuses, and they were seeing the technology health of the building, the experience. If I'm going to be living in these dorms, what's the experience like? All went into that decision of which school they chose to go to. The better environment, you can incremental. If you're able to attract 100 more students a year based upon having world-class facilities and a world-class smart building approach or smart campus approach, and you know what college tuition is times 100 folks, that starts to almost eclipse pretty quickly what the potential energy savings are.
Okay, well, we're at the top of the hour. We have a couple more questions. I will forward these questions to our presenters, and they'll be reaching out with answers to you. I want to thank everyone for taking time out of their busy day to attend the webinar. And I would especially like to thank our presenters for a great webinar today. And a few of you have asked how to get the case studies, and are they on your website?
Some of them may be. I'd say, Billy, if you just email us and email Matt, we'll make sure we can get those out. We readily share those.
Okay, so just send me an email, billy@appa.org, requesting the case studies, and I'll forward that to Rob and Matt, and they'll send them to you directly. Again, thank you so much for attending today. Have a great afternoon. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank y'all.
Thank you.